Hello, my friends, and welcome to Origins. What a joy to have you with us today on our show. Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and we use it to validate the truth of creation. And today we have a great scientist with us to help us validate the truth of creation. His name is Dr. Andrew Snelling.
Good morning,
Dr. Snelling, how good to have you with us today.
Great to be
Dr.
here.
Snelling is a PhD in geology from the University of Sydney, I believe.
That's correct.
An Australian by nationality. But a creation scientist by choice. And today we're going to be talking about the evidence for the worldwide flood. Well, help us do that today.
Well, many geologists are now accepting catastrophism. I mean, if the flood really occurred, then we'd expect to find evidence of catastrophism in the rock record. By catastrophism, of course, we mean that there were short, sudden events, and they were violent and worldwide in nature. Even the geologists now recognise the concept of the dinosaurs being wiped out on a global scale. There were mass extinctions. Creatures died out on a global scale. That was catastrophic. Traditionally, geologists have bought into the idea of uniformitarianism, or slow and gradual process. It's actually a philosophy of science that's based on the assumptions that the processes operating in the past have been the same as what we see observed operating in the present. And so normally people understand this in terms of the present is the key to the past. In other words, slow and gradual present day processes of rivers slowly carrying sand and mud has always been the way it was. And so, rock layers of mudstone, sandstone have formed as a result of rivers slowly and gradually carving out the land surface. But those views are now being challenged by the evidence we see for catastrophism in the rock record.
I think that's so fascinating. Just the idea of uniformitarianism doesn't face the reality of life. I would say to our viewers, you think about your life. Your life isn't shaped by what happens on the average days, but there were big days in your life. The day you found out you were sick, the day you lost a child, the day you lost your job. As you look back at life, it were those big events, those catastrophes, that really shaped what's happened and who you are. Yeah. And we live in that kind of a world. And the world has been shaped by some big events, not just the everyday humdrum. And I think that's so important.
And the difference between uniformitarianism and catastrophism is that the belief the present is the key to the past requires extensive timelines, whereas catastrophism, it's very easy to telescope it into just one major catastrophic event at the time of the flood.
And so it comes down to old Earth and young Earth again.
Yes, in a sense it does.
Okay.
So let's start by going to the Grand Canyon. The reason we go to the Grand Canyon, it's an area that is well exposed and well studied. And it's in all the textbooks, so everybody understands that area. Now, if we look at all these rock layers through the walls of the Grand Canyon, you can see them here. I've got them arrowed. Every one of those rock layers that are arrowed right to the top of the Grand Canyon up there have marine fossils in them. Now, the top of the Grand Canyon is over 1 mile above sea level, and therefore, how did marine fossils, creatures that live in the ocean, get up here on top of the continent at that elevation? It means the ocean waters must have flowed over the continents. And one of those rock units, if you want to look in detail, is halfway down, the Red Wall limestone. Now, the reason why it's got the name Red Wall, you'll see in a moment, but you can see it is here halfway down the canyon. And it's a limestone. It's easy to understand lime that's turned to stone. We can see in this next picture the cliffs, and I've pointed out where the Red Wall limestone is. You can see it there, see? It forms a red wall. It's a limestone that forms a red wall. See, not all of geology is difficult. And we can see the same when we get down to the Colorado River level. Again, I've arrowed the cliff there. See, a red wall. Okay. And what's exciting about this red wall limestone, it's full of fossils, marine fossils, up on the continent, ocean waters flowing up onto the continent. You can see in this photograph that we've got a crinoid, which is a coelid. You can see it here. It's the stem of it looked like a plant, but it actually is a creature that had tentacles, fern-like tentacles. And over here we see a bryozoan. See the lace features here? Okay. A bryozoan was a lace coral. And you can see these are broken remains in this limestone.
And are those, do those still exist today?
Absolutely.
In the ocean, you can still see those same...
Yes, we still see these creatures today.
Yes.
Here we see a brachiopod. which
Okay.
is a lamp shell. It's a variation on a clamp.
Right.
And in this limestone, particularly one of the major ones that we found in the canyon is this nautiloid fossil. It's a straight-shelled nautiloid. You can see it here.
Yes, sir.
It had a head like a squid out here. And you can see this tubes runs down the centre. What it used to do is it would suck in water and shoot the water out like that, and so it could propel itself. It was like a miniature jet engine. Now, we find in the Grand Canyon nautiloid fossils that are 6 feet long and 1 foot long, and some in between, 3 and 4 feet long. What does that tell us? The little ones were baby ones, the bigger ones were parents, and then these were the grandparents.
Okay.
And so we find lots of these straight-shelled nautiloids. Most people are familiar with a coiled nautilus today. Well, these ones were straight. And that means that when we find big ones, little ones, intermediate ones buried together, we're actually looking at what was a living population that got rapidly buried. And the exciting thing is that we find these, and see this bed here? This bed is about 7 foot thick, 7 foot thick. And we can trace it right through the Grand Canyon. In fact, we can trace it from the eastern Grand Canyon. This is one of the prime locations there, Nautiloid Canyon, but we could also find it in the suburbs of Las Vegas.
Wow.
So we're looking at a distance of something like 180 miles, and you can see this bed just outside the housing estates there in Las Vegas. And the National Park didn't know this bed was there until we discovered it, and we went through it. You can see all these locations where we find them. So here in the middle of a limestone, which the geologists say accumulated slowly and gradually, we've got evidence of catastrophism on a grand scale right through the canyon. In a matter of hours, you have all these fossils buried, marine fossils up on the continents, which is exactly the sort of evidence you'd expect to find for Noah's flood.
Absolutely.
The ocean waters came up onto the continent, bringing these marine creatures and nailed them and buried them catastrophically. Well, that's not the only example we find. In France, we find hundreds of thousands of marine creatures buried with amphibians, spiders, scorpions, millipedes, insects and reptiles. Notice something interesting there? That they're all land creatures, okay? So you've got a mixture of land and marine creatures together.
Yeah.
If a flood the ocean water's coming up into the continents, it brings the marine creatures and buries them with the land creatures.
Doesn't seem to me there could be any other explanation how you could have land
Absolutely
creatures
not.
and marine creatures together.
A local flood would be on the land, and you don't then have land creatures.
The land creatures
A global
would escape.
flood, the
That's right.
ocean waters come up onto the continents, bringing marine creatures and bury them
There's nowhere
with
to go.
land
That's right.
creatures.
Yeah.
And we see that in many places. In fact, if we go to Colorado, here we are, Colorado, the Florissant beds, again we see insects, freshwater clam shells, fish, birds. I mean, how do you fossilise a bird slowly?
I don't know.
It's got to drop from the sky and get buried straight away. And
Right.
100 of plant species, including blossoms, all buried together. Let me show you some photographs of some of these fossils. For example, here we see in this next photograph, look at that beautifully preserved fish. I'm going to show you some more in a moment. And then we can see a bee. I mean, look at the wing
detail's
venation, the
incredible,
pattern
yeah.
in the wings. See, you can see the...
Something
How
had
do
to
you
happen
preserve
quickly.
it? I mean, you
Yes.
step on a bee and squish it, and
Right.
it just rots very quickly. So look at the state of preservation of this bee. It had to have been buried very rapidly. And here we can see in this next photograph, we can see the blossoms. See the blossom here?
Wow.
And you can see the leaves, beautifully and exquisitely preserved, which is what we see in these fossil graveyards. Again, a mixture in that bed of watery and land creatures. We can see here again in Wyoming. Wyoming, again, alligator, fish of many varieties. We've got birds, turtles, mammals, including bats, all buried together with mollusks, which are clams,
Right.
crustaceans, and insects and palm leaves. Again, a mixture of land and sea-dwelling creatures. Evidence that the ocean waters flooded onto the continents and buried all these things together. Now I want to give you another example. I've got to talk about Australia. I mean,
You've got to.
I've got to let you see. Now we're going to Tasmania, the island state of Australia, which is down the south, right down the bottom, and it's a very pleasant place. Let's look at Fossil Bluff. You can see it's an 80-foot high cliff, 80 foot high, and it's limestone. And we find in this the fossils. First of all, we see these clams, see these broken shells. The broken shells indicate that it was rapid and catastrophic. Look at the little pebbles we find, okay? To move the pebbles, you need fast-moving water. So this was a fast-moving ocean current that collected all these shells, smashed them up and broke them up and buried them together. See another one over here, near the camera lens cap for scale. So these are quite large. And in this fossil bed, we found the remains of a toothed whale. See the teeth?
Look at that.
Okay, the teeth. And this is on display at the museum in the capital of the state, in Hobart. So that was the toothed whale, and in that same cliff, we've found the remains of a marsupial possum. Here you are, you can see the backbone, the vertebrae, and here's some of the limb bones here and here.
So to state the obvious, you have the marine animal and the land animal all in the same
See,
fossil
that's the
bed.
question I asked people.
Right.
When was the last time you saw a whale and a possum living together?
Yeah, can't happen.
No, you don't see it happen.
They could die together,
And
but
so
they couldn't live
you have
together.
to ask yourself the question, how did a whale and a possum get buried together?
How
I mean,
indeed.
it means that the ocean waters had to flood up onto the continent, and of course they had to have been buried together. You know, many people see in textbooks drawings of past environments. This was where creatures lived together. But the only thing we can be absolutely certain of is this is where they are buried together, because that's where we observe them today.
Now, I'm dying to ask you how a old Earth evolutionist is going to refute what you've said, but we have to take a break first.
Okay.
So you just hold on to your answer. I can see your gun's loaded and you're ready to shoot, but we got to take a break. Don't you go away. Dr. Snelling's going to talk to us about how this overwhelming evidence is refuted by the other side. So you stay with us. We'll be right back.
Creation versus evolution. You weigh the evidence. The global flood, a saltwater legacy. The existence of salt lakes and inland seas provides strong evidence that there's been a global flood. The huge salty Caspian Sea is landlocked and has been shrinking in size. Lake Van near Mount Ararat and Lake Ermia are excellent examples of high elevation, landlocked salty lakes. How did water get so far inland? Why didn't it dry up long ago? A gigantic flood within the last 5,000 years would seem a very good answer. Today's guest on Origins, geologist Dr. Andrew Snelling, is the Director of Research at Answers in Genesis. He's been very involved in technical research, creationist publications, and is the author of Earth's Catastrophic Past, Volumes 1 and 2. Book orders are being taken at 800-778-3390. Andrew has traveled around the world speaking on the overwhelming scientific evidence consistent with the biblical account of creation and Noah's flood. Dr. Snelling has also been involved with the RATE project, which has produced breakthroughs on the subject of radiometric dating. Dr. Snelling can be reached at Answers in Genesis, P.O. Box 510, Hebron, Kentucky 41048, or visit the website www.answersingenesis.org.
We are back with Dr. Andrew Snelling, and we are talking about the evidence of a worldwide flood and how that validates the truth of Scripture. Now, Dr. Snelling, so far we've made two big points in this show. Would you review them for us?
Yeah, the first point was that if the flood really occurred, we'd expect to find evidence that the ocean waters flooded the continents. And the evidence we find is marine creatures way up on the continents, up on, for example, we talked about the Grand Canyon, at the top of the Grand Canyon, marine fossils, many layers of marine fossils. And we'd expect to find, because it was a catastrophe, that the plants and creatures were buried catastrophically. And we saw land and sea-dwelling creatures buried together.
I think that's amazing. In fact, the evidence seems so irrefutable to me, that it makes me wonder that when this same evidence is looked at by an old Earth evolutionist, what do they do with this evidence?
Well, they accept that individual layers could have formed catastrophically, but they want the millions of years in between. So what they propose is that the land surface sank, so the ocean came in and brought the fossils, and then it rose again, to account for the millions of years in between, where there was no deposition, no ocean on the continents. The trouble is, imagine the Grand Canyon area where you've about got 8 different layers with marine fossils. The continent's got to sink, the ocean's got to come in, then it's got to rise, then it's got to sink, then it's got to rise, sink, rise, sink, rise.
The Earth isn't sitting on an elevator piston. It isn't going up and down.
You can't explain that.
Right.
It's hard enough getting it to happen once, let alone so many times. And so it's so much simpler. There's a principle in geology, in science, called Occam's razor.
Right.
The simplest explanation is usually the right one. So you had one lot of ocean water coming across,
That's right,
depositing all those layers one on top of the other very rapidly, and then retreating at the end of the flood. So let me go up to the screen and show you what I have for you. We also find as another example, which is relevant to us here in the Pittsburgh area, is 7 trillion tonnes of vegetation in the world's coal beds. You know, the black stuff we dig up and burn in a power station. Well, most people don't realise that that's buried vegetation, it's fossilised vegetation. And at all the world's coal beds, there's at least 7 trillion tonnes.
That's a lot.
And the coal beds here in the eastern United States are also found in England and right across over to Russia. And it's the same coal beds.
Yeah.
But more of that later.
Okay.
Let's have a look at one of these ammonite fossils. This is one of these coiled ammonite fossils.
Yes.
And this is in the chalk in England. Now look at the size. There's a pen for scale. Right. That's about 6 inches across. So we're talking about 18 inches across, yeah, this creature. Now the chalk in which this is buried, the geologists say, accumulated slowly and gradually. But you imagine how long it would take to bury that if at 1 inch per 1,000 years. I mean, this creature didn't sit around for thousands of years waiting to be fossilised. It happened catastrophically. And this is what the chalk looks like under the microscope. See the tiny little evidence of little tiny shells? Here's a bigger one. You can see the different chambers.
But there are thousands of different units.
There's trillions of these.
Trillions.
I mean, this is under a microscope. This is
right,
about 50 times magnification. And so you can imagine these tiny critters buried on a mass scale, burying those bigger ammonites. This is a global scale fossil graveyard in England, in America, in Australia, all around the world.
All over the world.
Isn't that the evidence we'd expect to find for a catastrophic global flood as the Bible records? Absolutely yes. Now, rapid burial of plants and creatures. Look at this fossil fish. Now, ask yourself the question whether all the fish, dead fish on the bottom of the ocean waiting to be fossilised today. If the present is the key to the past, we ought to be able to see fish being fossilised today.
We're not making any fossils today.
No, in fact, when a fish dies, it either floats or it rots or it's eaten by scavengers. Look at the eye socket here. Look at the ribs.
The details
the
incredible.
Details you can see.
Look at the tail, how
I mean,
fine
I like
it
to
is.
say
Yes.
to people, to produce a fossil fish like this, what you do is, when your pet goldfish isn't looking, back up a concrete wagon and dump the concrete on top of it, because that's the only way you'll preserve a fossil fish like that.
Something has to happen quickly.
That's right. Now let me give you another example. This is what we call a trilobite. It's got a head, okay, it's got a body section through here, and then it's got a tail. So it's got 3 lobes, so we call it a trilobite. It's like a little snail-like creature on that lived on the bottom of the ocean. But look at the state of preservation, and particularly, see this knob here?
Yeah.
That's the eye of the trilobite.
It's there in perfect form.
It's that, and we can see preserve the lens of the trilobite. And it's so complicated that we, with all our ingenuity, have only been able to build similar lenses in the last 5 decades. Huh. And look at the exquisite preservation of these creatures. Catastrophic burial by a global flood. I like this. This is an Australian one.
That's why you like it. You're a good bloke.
It's Morsinites sprigii, named after 2 famous Australian geologists. Now, most people think that's a fossil flower, but it's actually a fossil jellyfish.
Oh.
Now, the man who found these in outback South Australia over an area of 400 square miles found hundreds and hundreds of these jellyfish fossils. Now you think about it, what happens to a jellyfish when it gets washed up on the sand? Because this is found in a sandstone, okay? It would melt in the sun, or the waves and the wind would break it up.
Right.
So the man who found these jellyfish fossils over 400 square miles in outback South Australia, hundreds of these jellyfish fossils, said they all had to form in less than 1 day.
Wow.
So you see, that's rapid catastrophic burial, where the ocean waters are wiping out all these jellyfish and bury them rapidly. How long did it take to form these two fish fossils? I mean, here, one fish didn't get time to finish his breakfast before the two of them were buried and fossilised.
So 1 second that fish is alive, and the next second it's being buried. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so this is what we mean by rapid burial. And look at the exquisite state of fossil preservation. Again, you can see the backbone, you can see the fin, you can see the tails. And there's lots of examples of this in the fossil record. Let's have a look at this next one. This is one of my favourite examples. Here, this actually comes from a textbook on evolution, and so you'd think it would be evidence of slow and gradual processes. This is an ichthyosaur. You can see the snout here. An ichthyosaur was a marine reptile. It's not a fish, it's actually a reptile. Here's the tail down here, and this guy, it's actually a mother. She's 6 foot long, okay?
Wow.
And notice something interesting here. What's this we see here? That's a little baby.
Oh.
And this is buried in a limestone. And this is the mother, 6 feet long, buried, having just given birth to a little baby.
Literally in the process of birth.
Exactly. Now you think about it. A creature of this size, we know from earthquakes and tsunamis that a lot of creatures sense danger and escape from the danger zone. So if this mother had sensed the danger was coming and there was time for her to escape, she would have escaped. You know, when this photograph was published in the journal Nature, the editor put under a caption, "Time freeze frame." What he meant was that 1 minute, mother was giving birth to a baby, split second later, tons and tons of sand and mud just buried her alive. And she didn't have time to escape, and a little baby was just there. So this is incredible evidence for rapid burial and exquisite fossil preservation, which is the kind of evidence you'd expect in a catastrophic global flood.
Dr. Snelling, this is very fascinating, but the question, I guess, that comes to my mind is, so what? This is wonderful evidence, and your passion for a worldwide flood is obvious. Does it really matter, though? I mean, isn't it just enough that we trust Jesus?
If the biblical record is literally correct, then that means that most of the fossils, which have to have come after the fall of man, after the curse, when death came into the world, if that view is literally correct, then most of the fossils formed during the flood, and that wipes out 500 million years of the geological history of the Earth, and that means the Earth is therefore young. So it does matter.
So if Genesis 1 to 11 isn't true, John 3:16 can't be true either.
Correct.
And they are tied together.
Exactly.
And it is one
It's
story.
how you see the evidence.
Yes, that's right.
Looking through biblical glasses or looking through glasses that don't recognize God.
The only eyewitness we have to the flood was God himself.
Correct.
My friends, if there's ever a show that made our closing comment true, it's this one. It's God's view that he created you, and he's given us incredible evidence of that creation, and it should be your worldview too. I hope that Dr. Snelling's incredible presentation has validated and brought confidence to your belief in the veracity of Scripture and the truth of God's Word. And I hope that you'll join us again soon on Origins. Until then, God bless you, my friend.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 905 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins, program number 905, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.